Welcome to the channel. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Today we'll be looking at the Eniton S1083G. I featured this on my recent unboxing video along with 6 other watches. Now Eniton is a new brand to feature on the channel, and from what I have here with me today and what I've looked at, I would say they are quite promising. So we know what this is homaging, and if you go over to the store where this was purchased from, you'll see they specialize in a lot of really high-end and perhaps obscure pieces. And from what I've seen is that they provide pretty well specified watches. Now specifications and dimensions will be on screen. And the one thing I mentioned in the unboxing is that when it comes to homages of really high-end pieces, I feel if the finishing isn't done to a high degree, then there's no real point in getting the cheaper options. It just looks scruffy. So this is where we're going to start with the Eniton. The finishing by far is a standout feature on this watch, and it's the best I have seen of this particular design, and I want you to bear the cost in mind. It's £185 when I last checked, and what you get for that, it's ridiculous. There's a mix of brushing and polishing on this watch, and the brushing is mainly of two types. You have a coarse grain, which is done with purpose as it helps distinguish certain features. Take that large 8-sided bezel. Coarse linear brushing makes it really stand out. It's done beautifully with consistent grain, pointing towards machine brushing, which gives you those perfect straight lines. Now you've also got to look at transition lines to determine how well finished a watch is. And on the bezel, the transition into those beveled edges is very crisp and really well defined. You can also make out those edges on those facets. The mirror polishing is very bright, definitely bringing a bling factor to the watch, and then you get a softer circular brushing just along the bottom of the bezel. So this one piece of metal features 3 different types of finishing. The bezel is also decorated with polished screws, and you can tell it's gone through a high-end assembly process. As I shine the light across the top, you don't see any scratches or tool marks. Now this same 3-stage finishing is present across the whole watch. Moving on to the case, you've got the same coarse grain along the A face and along the lugs. You get a sharp defined line where the lugs drop down, and the same consistency in the brushing. Now this is very important. You'll see the precision on the polished bevels along the sides. It really is perfection. The bevels taper from the top of the case as they go along the length, and they also match that point where the lugs drop down, and this is really meticulous workmanship. Now the sides of the case feature that slick linear satin brushing, which does soften the light. And that is another thing. The level of finishing determines how the light reflects off the watch, and it needs to be impeccable for it to look good. Now people that trash AliExpress watches by saying cheap Chinese crap, they don't have a clue when it comes to knowing the reality of a well-finished watch. China has increased its manufacturing capability tenfold since those awful clones they were doing around 15 years ago. Now let's move on to the Caseback. Same style of finishing that we saw on the bezel, 3-stage, but soft circular brushing along the A face. You also got those polished screws and a mirror polished bevel, and that slither of satin brushing along the base. What's more is that the exhibition Caseback is also sapphire. Now going back to my point I made earlier, these guys really do spec out their watches. Now I want you to focus on the rotor. They have absolutely no reason whatsoever to modify this rotor. We would have all been happy seeing that standard Seiko NH35 movement that I've been seeing for years. Even the Seiko Presage just used a golden rotor, which made us all really happy. But take a look at this. You've got striping, you've got the gold engraved Eniton logo and that awesome skeletonized logo, which they've machined into this small and insignificant rotor. They've added so much value-added manufacturing here, it definitely looks the dog's bees. Now I'm also going to show you something else. Curiosity did get the better of me. I opened the screws on the Caseback, and this is where you can see I've slightly dinked up the screws by using a smaller screwdriver, but let me show you what I discovered. These screws are not your usual type of screws. They fasten into the Caseback in a way which I didn't expect. You'll see there's actually another barrel inside that screw, and it sits down into a pin located onto the back of the watch. So you've also got internal threading on those screws, and this level of detail and manufacturing that we're getting for £185, I find it really stunning. Now in terms of other functions, the crown is very proportionate. coming in at 6mm, and it's also fully brushed with some signage on there, and the screw down on it is very smooth. The threads are buttery smooth, no issues on the crown function at all. Now let's move on to the bracelet. Here you'll find a 2-stage finish. The coarse linear brushing is the only type of brushing across the links. This is a 3-link design bracelet. That larger bar has 2 individual pieces attached, and every piece has to be completed individually. You've also got beveled and polished edges which run all the way down that tapered bracelet. The center links have also been polished around the sides and the edges, which meet that flat brushed A-face, and together it looks stunning. There really is so much going on. The light absolutely loves rolling off the bracelet and all those brushed and polished surfaces. It really shines, and because it's under so much light, again, it only looks this good because it's finished so well. This is the most refined version of this style of watch. Now on the reverse of the bracelet, it is fully brushed, and those bevels are still present on the underside, but again, they're brushed. Now we move on to the butterfly clasp, and it's very substantial, very thick and robust. Nothing like those flimsy, cheap clasps. Even that square piece with the logo has polished bevels on all edges, and it's also engraved. Now the function is absolutely solid. Now let's move some links, because again, this is slightly different to what we normally used to. This is not your normal link removal system. Once you do unscrew that little screw there, which actually only goes in a couple of millimeters, you now need to use a tool with a longer pin, something like this, and with that you just push down, and there's another pin which actually comes out all the way. It does actually work absolutely fine. So to put it back together, you just reverse the whole process, insert that pin back in, using the same tool to push that pin further down, and of course reapplying that screw. Now there's also one more point to mention here, back on finishing. Every version of this watch that I've seen, those smaller links in the center seem to be quite rough around the edges, to the point it does catch fibers, from the cloth when you wipe it down. Now this one, I'd like to mention that it has no rough edges which I can feel along the face at all, and that was a huge put off for me from those designs, because there's so many angles and facets, it doesn't feel great in hand, and this is definitely an exception because it's been done correctly. Finally, let's move on to, I'd say, the least interesting part of the watch, the dial. Sometimes it's the other way around, but on this one, the case steals the show. So this comes in three other colors: a white, a grey, and also a black. And you'll notice they all feature black date wheels. I think they could have used white date wheels on the other colors except the black, but it's something I've gotten used to. The dial details include an applied polished Eniton logo. At this point you all say just use the logo, and I would possibly agree. Then the rest is all printed, including that minute track and the text. There's an applied beveled date frame which includes a tiny portion of the baton markers which are also applied, and the markers are very typical of this design, and they're faceted and fully polished. The handset also is what is expected, just fully polished and no further micro detailing. I feel the design here has potentially led to the basic finishing that's present on the dial. Now the waffle texture has decent and adequate depth, and definition is also just decent. It doesn't stand out as amazingly well defined. For example, the Zhao Dao IWC homage that I looked at, that waffle dial was wow, just so much definition. I'd say this is just a touchdown from that, but again, sufficient. You also have loomed markers and hands, and yes, it does glow. It's not super bright, but again, adequate and what's expected from a sports watch. I guess it could have been a little punchier, and I would have expected it to be BGW9, but they've gone with C3. So overall, I'd say slight room for improvement on that loom. Now finally, for the big reveal, what's it like having this watch on wrist? Now the first thing, the way the light shines off this watch is incredible. Those brushed facets and those polished highlights do their job spectacularly. It stands out and it does look very impressive. Fit wise, and I have to be honest here, while I would say it does fit and I managed to size it just fine, giving me that tiny bit of looseness, it's those gaps under the case, just under where the lugs turn down, which I don't really like. So for my 6.5 inch wrist, it does weigh a little big, And that's come from someone who regularly wears the Seiko MM300 and the MM600. This definitely though does have a lot of presence, and if I were to be sensible, I'd say you need a 7-inch wrist at a minimum to wear this comfortably, maybe 6 3/4 at an absolute push. So it's for the bigger wristed audience who usually say most of my watches I look at are too small. Well, this one is for you guys. So overall, very impressed with the Eniton S1083G, and I stand by everything I've said. It's the best finished watch of this style across the whole of AliExpress brands. I love the details and especially that rotor work. Sapphire sandwich included, and that overall execution has surprised me and made me take notice. All of this for £185, you can't get any better. I'd say it's worth every penny. But I will say this is the only model I've looked at from Eniton. Is it a one-hit wonder? So I want to reserve just a small bit of my judgment until I see some of the other models, just in case you guys see this and decide to buy something else from the store. They've made an incredible first impression, so if you like this design, then don't take any more time thinking and get yourself one. You won't be disappointed. That's it from me today. Drop your thoughts below in the comment section. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.